disaster, but there is no way. It shows, for one, the government can't sell it.
Today, after all the tears, the government's new boat people policy is another committee. I ask Labor's Anthony Albanese, by how much will your carbon tax cut the world's temperature? Alexander Downer on the rampaging Clive Palmer. And a prize he won't like for MP Mark Dreyfus. I'm Andrew Bolt and this is the Bolt Report. Lots of tears for boat people this week, but no action. On Wednesday, just days after 90 more people drowned, authorities got another distress call from this boat, which somehow sank after this photo was taken from a ship sent in response.
The information that we have is that there were as many as 150 people on the boat.
That news finally shamed Parliament into holding an emergency debate to fix the border laws which Labor weakened 4 years ago. That change was a catastrophic mistake, luring around 800 boat people to their deaths. But the closest Labor came to admitting that was this.
I'm troubled by the Nauru approach. I'm troubled by the Malaysian approach. When the circumstances change, you change your mind, and the question is asked, what would you do? Well, I have changed my mind.
Now, the Greens are so irrational, they will never admit our weak laws kill people. So, Prime Minister Julia Gillard on Wednesday had two options. Either persuade the opposition to back her plan to swap 800 boat people for 4,000 refugees from Malaysia, or to give in to the opposition and reopen the detention centre on Nauru. Well, the opposition said no to Malaysia.
I will never, ever support a people swap where you can send a 13-year-old child unaccompanied to a country without supervision.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
It'll be over my dead body.
What in fact it will mean is that the people smugglers will load up the boats with women and children, because the government has already indicated that women and children are most unlikely to be sent back to Malaysia.
In fact, many of those who drowned last week were unaccompanied boys. If Gillard's Malaysian people swap doesn't apply to them, it won't stop more coming. But would Nauru work any better? Well, only if the coalition locks up boat people for longer than the year it seemed to suggest under its compromise offer.
People who are processed at any centre would have the processing of their claims done within 12 months.
But in the end, the government wouldn't compromise and left us with the most useless idea of all, another committee.
That is to work quickly and to provide a report to me and to the nation about the best way forward for our nation in dealing with asylum seeker issues.
Gillard's committee of three seems chosen to suit Labor. It includes Paris Aristotle, who has previously said he agrees with Labor's policy, but not the coalition's. This is no fix really, and Parliament now won't meet for another 6 weeks. Meanwhile, 5 more boats have already turned up since Wednesday. So, let's build more coffins. We'll need them. Every week, on average, we ask 3 or 4 Labor ministers to come on this show. Only one has ever agreed, Leader of the House, Anthony Albanese, who joins me again. Anthony, let me tell you, thank you.
Happy Clean Energy Day, Andrew.
Well, let's talk about that in a second. But first, the boat people. In 2002, Julia Gillard called the Pacific Solution a costly and unsustainable farce, but it actually worked. Now, in fact, since Labor scrapped it, the boats have returned. 800 people have drowned on your own figures. Was that a terrible mistake?
Well, what we know, Andrew, and we know this from people who supported the Pacific Solution at the time, people like Andrew Metcalfe, for example, advisor to the Howard government, advisor to us, is that The Pacific solution did work for a little while, but once people realised they would then be settled in Australia or New Zealand, word got out, it essentially was a bus stop on the way to Australia.
But the point is, it was a solution. Julia Gillard said it was a costly and unsustainable farce at the beginning. How can we trust her judgment now?
What we've got to do, Andrew, is to listen to the experts, and that's what the Prime Minister's doing, and that's what the government's doing.
You didn't listen to the experts when you scrapped the Pacific solution? You didn't listen to the experts then?
They were saying
800 people have died.
They were saying at that point in time that it had a deterrent value. We voted for, remember, Andrew, we voted for, in 2001, we didn't play politics, we voted for the legislation that John Howard brought in. What occurred, though, over a period of time is that the people smugglers model went back because they could say to their customers, as terrible a trade as it is, you will get to go to Australia, you'll just go to Nauru on the way through.
So you don't think scrapping it was a mistake? I mean, you're trying to bring it back now. The boats were 3 a year, you scrapped it, and now bang, we see the result, 800 people in the sea. You don't accept you made a mistake.
You need to respond, Andrew, at the time that you're dealing with things. Now, we know in terms of push and pull factors, we know that there's a combination of both.
No, but Julia Gillard at the time said there were no pull factors. Well, it was all push. She was wrong then too, wasn't she?
Well, the fact is that there were factors in terms of what was occurring in Sri Lanka, what was occurring in Afghanistan. You have to look
she actually said there were no pull
why
factors.
People are leaving. Well, in terms of what the experts tell us, Andrew, is that Nauru by itself won't work today.
But what I'm trying to ask you, and everyone listening would know what I'm asking you, wasn't it a terrible, tragic mistake leading to the loss of 800 lives for you to scrap something that was working, leading directly to this influx of boats?
No, because it wouldn't have continued to work, Andrew. That's what the experts tell us.
It may not have continued to work.
And they tell us also...
You see, there's no connection between you scrapping the Pacific solution and the boats returning.
Well, they tell us also, for example, that the implementation of temporary protection visas meant that people who were here were getting their family onto boats, such as Civex, was leading to tragedy. They tell us this is a complex...
This is a
complex
Civex
issue.
On 3 a year for 6 years, everyone can see what's happened since. You don't accept there's any connection between you having scrapped the Pacific solution and the temporary protection visas and the influx we saw almost immediately from that point.
Well,
no connection.
What I'm really interested in, Andrew, is how we get...
I just want to get to this bit. Can we trust Labor's judgment if you got that bit wrong?
Yes, we can, because we are listening to the experts. The experts are telling us. We've struggled hard. We haven't been dogmatic about this. We've been prepared to compromise. We've been prepared to say Malaysia solution plus Nauru. We've even offered to have an independent review into temporary protection visas.
But are the experts that are telling you that Nauru didn't work, are they the ones that told you that scrapping the Pacific solution would be beaut, there'd be no consequence?
They're telling us it won't work.
Were they the same people?
They're telling us it won't work.
No, but in 2008 when you scrapped it, what were the experts telling you then?
Andrew, they're telling us it won't work.
In 2008, the experts in 2008, did they tell you scrap the protection visas, scrap Pacific solution, there'll be no consequences?
The experts were telling us, Andrew, that temporary protection visas were leading to an incentive for people to get their family onto boats. And they were telling us...
In 2008, did the experts tell you to scrap the Pacific solution?
What was starting to happen, Andrew, was that people were beginning to be... They were in Nauru, out of sight, out of mind. But guess what? They got to come to Australia or got to come to New Zealand, and the people smugglers were out there plying their trade saying, don't worry about it, you'll get to come to Australia. What we need is something that actually stops the boats. The experts tell us that Malaysia will do that, not because 800 will go, but in fact the 800 won't go. Once people realise that they'll go to the back of the queue, then they won't come.
Carbon tax day today. Your tax and the $10 billion clean energy fund that you've got are meant to cut emissions by 5% by 2020. By how much will the world's temperature change as a consequence of Australia's sacrifice?
Well, what we know, Andrew, is that together with the world, we can make a difference.
All right, what is the difference? What is our part of that difference? It's a huge investment. The ambition is to stop the world from heating. What is Australia's contribution in terms of temperature?
We have, you know, that you can't do that sort of calculation.
You can. I've got experts.
You can't, Andrew.
Yes, you can.
That's the same
Professor
as saying,
Roger Jones of the Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change estimates it, and this is the most generous estimate I've seen, as about 4 1,000ths of a degree. Would you disagree with the IPCC on this?
What we know, Andrew, is that if no
would
one...
you disagree with that figure?
I'm not a scientist.
So you're never in cabinet. You're never in cabinet when voting for this. Said, excuse me, Prime Minister, by how much difference? What's the difference will this make actually to the world's temperature? You never asked that question.
I tell you what we do in cabinet.
Did you ever ask that question?
I'll tell you what we do in cabinet.
No, but did you ever ask that question?
What we do, but that's a nonsense question.
It's not a nonsense.
That's
The
like
whole
saying,
thing is to stop the world from rising in temperature.
How many lives do you save through foreign aid? Do you stop world poverty? So therefore, you don't make any contribution to foreign aid because world poverty would still exist.
You need a consequence for the sacrifice you're trying to ask Australians to do. You've got no idea. So I'm asking you, you have got no idea, have you?
We know.
As an architect of this plan,
Andrew,
what the cut in the world's temperature will be. You don't know.
Andrew, what we do know, Andrew, is that if the whole world acts, we need to stop dangerous climate change.
Gotcha. No,
we need to stop
global warming. All right.
What difference you don't believe in it. You don't believe in it. So that makes sense for you to oppose a price on carbon. The whole world together will act.
You do believe that the world is warming as a result of our gases. If we cut our gases, how much will it stop?
Andrew, you know that that's a nonsense question.
It's not.
The question isn't that.
It's exactly the question.
The question isn't that.
Pay this tax and you'll stop the world from warming. Well, how much will it make a difference?
Andrew, that's the wrong question with due respect.
It's the
question
exact
is...
question.
No, it's not. The question is, if we don't act, what will occur to the world if we have global temperatures rise past the tipping point of more than 2 degrees?
What are you going to stop?
So we have to stop it.
How's this going to stop it?
It will make a contribution.
Which is?
It will make... Well, 5%. We'll remove 160 million tonnes of carbon, 160 million tonnes of carbon, equivalent to taking 45 million cars off the road.
Cars, I want temperature. I've run out of time. Look, Anthony, I'm not going to get an answer. I know this, but I really respect you coming in. You're a straight-up guy, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Good to be with you, Andrew.
Thank you. Coming up, today is Carbon Day, but what good will this tax do? Today is C Day, Carbon Tax Day, when we start to pay the world's biggest carbon tax to stop the world from warming. Now, the opposition leader has predicted terrible things.
Whyalla risks becoming a ghost town, an economic wasteland, if this carbon tax goes ahead.
And today, the opposition has released another scare advertisement to mark the big day.
There will be no carbon tax under the government I lead.
You can't trust Labor, but you can trust Labor's carbon tax to cost you more every day.
Who do you trust? Who do you trust?
Joining me on Carbon Day is former Foreign Minister Alexander Downer and former New South Wales Minister John Della Bosca. Happy Carbon Day, gentlemen. John, the world's going to be saved from this day on. By how much will this carbon tax, I tried to ask Anthony Albanese, didn't get an answer, by how much will the world's temperature fall as a consequence of what we're paying from today?
I don't know, Andrew. I don't think anyone knows. That's right, and it is. Of course, there's two kinds of ways of talking about this. A lot of people talked about global warming as a giant Y2K conspiracy. Of course, the carbon tax campaign we just saw from the coalition is a giant Y2K campaign as well. There will be no sudden collapse of the Australian economy as of today. So
you don't think Whyalla is going to be a ghost town?
Well, I don't know. I'm not an expert, and I don't even know much about the way Whyalla is right now. I haven't been there for 20 years, but I just think that what we can know is that both political parties have the same emissions targets. Therefore, the kinds of imposts on the economy to achieve those are going to be broadly similar. I suppose the carbon tax approach really best understood from the point of view of the advertisements we just saw is clearly going to tax, but there will be clear compensation.
But this is what I don't understand. Look, Alex, we're talking about tax and compensation. John's quite right, but John is also right to say that most people don't even know it's going to make a flicker of difference to the world's climate. It won't. What on earth are we doing this for?
I'm sorry to say this, but as somebody who's no longer in politics, this is just clearly about politics. If you collect whatever it is, $22 billion from the Australian public through higher taxes, and then you pay it all back to them, and you tell the public that's going to cool the planet, then you're clearly having people on. I mean, it is a completely...
Surely what you need to do, don't you? If you say it's going to cool the planet, you have to at least tell them the figure.
Well,
what's the figure?
Of course. Well, we produce 1.5% of the world's CO2 emissions. They are going to continue to increase, by the way. So that 1.5% isn't going to start coming down. So they're going to continue to increase over the next few years, and we're whacking a massive tax on people, and we're going to pay compensation to some of them for the tax. Look, this is about Labor doing a deal, Julia Gillard doing a deal with the Greens. She promised before the election, of course, not to do it. She did a deal with the Greens to form this minority government, this was part of the deal. Break
and no
the
one
promise,
can say
do
what
the deal.
difference it will make to the climate. I find this incredible.
They can't and they won't, because it won't make any difference.
And they
know that's the answer, and they don't want to say it.
Exactly right. But John, here's another crazy thing I don't understand about this tax, right? The idea is to stop us from having what they call polluting industries, heavy emitters. But as soon as two say, wait a minute, we might go out of business, and I'm talking about the Alcoa smelter near Geelong and a briquettes factory in the Latrobe Valley. This week they get $90 million in government grants to keep them going. I thought the whole idea was to put them out of business.
Hang on a second, Andrew. All of these kinds of initiatives, whether they be trade-based, getting the industry more efficient or getting industry to be less carbon tax emitting, it doesn't really matter. There's still no government in Australia that allows the perfect to defeat the good. So even if you're an absolute free trader, you still believe that there needs to be things put in place to allow transition for industries. And initiatives like the Briquettes Initiative and others are transitional initiatives, of course.
But hang on, burning briquettes is a menace to global warming, if you believe global warming theory. That's exactly the kind of business this is supposed to drive to the wall. I mean, why is the government spending this kind of money, 50 million, I think, in this case, to keep it going? What's the point?
Well, I haven't seen the
nothing to do with
submissions.
Votes, is it? Nothing to do with the fact that the AWEU said one single vote and one single job lost,
votes, but there's also electoral votes, and that's part of democracy. That's part of the way the whole thing works. So I think the fair point would be to say, yes, OK, burning briquettes is always likely to add to CO2 emissions. But
I saw quotes
from the minister talking about transitional arrangements, and I'm assuming that they're what's being put in place. And of course, from time to time, there'll be industries which will continue for as long as we can imagine, which continue to emit CO2s, but there's going to be...
It's a con. It is a gigantic con. But look, you mentioned democracy. I'll tell you something which is spooky. The government is so freaking out about the whole carbon tax counter-attack that I think is threatening free speech beyond the bounds of, justifiability. Here's Assistant Treasurer David Bradbury when the Liberals were saying, well, we're sending out a poster to butchers to explain that the tax might have an impact on prices, and please put it up in your window. Cop this for a threat.
If you do mislead your customers, then you could face fines of up to $1.1 million.
Alexander.
I think this illustrates the point, really, that this political stunt, the carbon tax, which is essentially about Julia Gillard doing a deal with the Greens, that's all. It's obviously not about changing the weather or anything like that, is becoming a tremendous political burden for the government. The public are onto it.
But to threaten butchers with $1 million fines.
To threaten butchers with $1 million fines for putting a Liberal poster in their windows.
That'll put the price of your snags up.
It's preposterous. They're just
it's worse than preposterous.
I've never
Labor's
seen a
problem with-
government like this before in my life. I've never seen such an incompetent government ever.
What's Labor's problem with free speech?
Well, look, I think David Bradbury was ill-advised to answer the question in that way, because clearly a political...
Dorothy Dix, though, by the way.
A political poster, yeah, but I mean, people concoct Dorothy Dix's an hour or so before question time. I don't know exactly. I haven't spoken to David Bradbury about it, and I only saw that little bit of the quote. But it seems to me that it wouldn't fall under the normal ambit of consumer law.
You would hope
to put
not.
a
Yeah, but to
political
go
poster in your
threaten
office
that,
might
for
be a
heaven's
mock
sake.
Put a
priceless.
political poster up is quite a common practice. In my electorate, they used to put posters up in shops condemning me and so on. I can't say I was in favour of
get
it,
up at Parliament
but
and say,
I never
$1 million fine.
I never thought of whacking them with $1 million fine.
And when you come back, you'll be dangerous. But listen, we've got to move on to the boat people policy. Since all the politicians on Wednesday with tears in their eyes said, we've got to change this, now or never, it's it, that's it, no more dying. We've had 5 boats arrive. What a farce.
Takes 2 to tango, takes 2 to compromise. The problem here is there should be a compromise. There must be a compromise. The Australian people are sick of it, regardless of whether they're kind of, shall I say, predisposed towards refugees or disposed against them. If that's a crude way of stereotyping different views, then it is a shame. It is an embarrassment. I think it's an indictment of the hung parliament. I've never been a fan of the hung parliament.
It's not just that, John. What I want to know is this: why isn't Labor saying, when we opposed, when we cut the Pacific Solution, we cut TP, we scrapped all that in 2008, we made a mistake. We need to go back to it. Why haven't they admitted to a mistake that's led to 800 people dying?
Well, it's of no consequence, but I've on a number of occasions said that there were serious mistakes made in relation to
one of them
policy on
said we made a mistake.
And my own view, if I was advising them, and I'm not, I would advise that somebody should prop up and say there's been mistakes made by our government and previous governments about this, and we need to get it right, and there needs to be a compromise. Tony Abbott has to give some ground, and the government has to give some ground.
I just want to make this point about this so-called Tony Abbott has to make a compromise. The reason Julia Gillard broke her promise on the carbon tax, and she said this herself, was because she had to face the reality of the Parliament, and therefore she couldn't stick with her previous policy. She said that on a range of different issues, but when it comes to the boat people, she won't face the reality of the Parliament. She says, I want my solution or my so-called compromise, or else there'll be nothing. Now, she's the Prime Minister, Labor is the government. Their job is to govern, and they have to take into consideration what they can get through the Parliament. They have 2 choices. They either go with the status quo, which is to do nothing, that's the Greens policy, or they go with the Liberal policy, which is to go back to what John Howard's government did, of which I was a significant architect, and it was a tremendous success. In any case...
Get it off the books. Do it.
Look, ignominious as it might be, she was prepared to put up with a broken promise in order to face the... to deal with the reality of the Parliament over the carbon tax. She apparently is not prepared to compromise with the Parliament and deal with the realities of the Parliament on the boat people issue. Again, it's politics, politics, politics. That's all she's doing.
I tend to agree with you. We've only got 50 seconds. Clive Palmer, because we promote it, we've got to ask you. Clive Palmer, the billionaire, says, get people who are lobbyists out of the Federal Council of the Liberal Party. You are a lobbyist, or you're registered with a lobbyist. Was this billionaire having a go at you? What is this man?
No, we're great mates, Clive Palmer and I, and the Liberal Party is a very democratic organisation, and it voted to keep the present system in place, and I think...
is Clive a wrecking ball?
Not at all, no. He's a great character, but he is not somebody who's going to determine the structure of the Liberal Party. Of course he's not.
I think he got actually a bit disinvited from this, from the council that was meeting.
No, he came and made a couple of speeches at the Federal Council.
Yeah, asked to...
Happy to have him there.
Okay.
Happy to have him there.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. John Delabosky, Alexander Downer.
Thanks,
and
Andrew.
coming up, Parliament's a tough place, but one MP hit way, way below the belt. Labor and its media supporters tried this week to shame opposition leader Tony Abbott into backing the government's people swap with Malaysia by claiming he didn't care if boat people died. In fact, it might even suit him.
You're left thinking that he sees political advantage in people dying.
Mark Dreyfus is the winner of my Smear of the Week. And that's the show. Thanks for watching. 10 News is next. I'm Andrew Bolton on this day that Australia started to cut the world's temperature. Goodbye.